Sophie, 4, woke up one morning to find her mother still asleep. For her, this was very unusual, as her mother always woke up before her, and when she tried to wake her mother, she noticed nothing worked. As the hours ticked by and her mother was still asleep, Sophie started to feel something could be wrong. This was the only number she knew to call because her mother had told her to memorize it for emergencies. Tears welled up in her eyes as she paused before she answered. "My mommy has been asleep all day," Sophie said. The 911 operator was shocked to hear such a small child on the other side of the line. He quickly got an image of the situation and sent police and an ambulance to her address. But when the police arrived at the apartment building, getting inside seemed to be harder than they thought. Time was ticking, and everyone knew this. They knew there was only one thing they could do to get inside. But when the officers were finally able to enter the house, they were shocked by what they saw. Sophie, who was only 4 years old, and her mother, Hannah. Sophie's father had never been in the picture. He'd left them as soon as Hannah told him the news about her pregnancy. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss our upcoming stories. Hannah had always made sure that Sophie cared for her daughter. Mornings were their favorite time of the day. They would wake up, eat breakfast together, and Hannah would play music and dance in the kitchen with her daughter. But today was different, and Sophie could sense it from the start. As soon as Sophie woke up, she felt something was different about her mother. Usually, Hannah would turn off the alarm clock, but she hadn't moved an inch since it went off. Sophie stood next to her mother's bedside and stared at her. She must be very tired, Sophie thought. Time ticked by and Sophie's mother was still sound asleep in bed. Sophie slowly opened the door to her mother's bedroom. But there came no response. She felt helpless and didn't know what to do. She ran downstairs and grabbed the phone. Sophie told the operator her address and waited. "Sophie, we need you to open the door for us." "I can't reach it," Sophie said. But she wasn't about to give up. She knew she had to open the door for those men. Sophie quickly ran back to the table and grabbed the chair. "Don't worry, Sophie. We will be with you in a few minutes." But Sophie couldn't help but feel panicked. How were the officers going to enter her house if the door was locked? "We won't leave you, darling," an officer responded. Her heart was beating in her chest, and suddenly the officers started counting down from 3 to 1. A loud blow echoed through the living room. She heard a third blow and could see the door move a little. Then she realized they were trying to break down the door with something. A fourth blow was slammed against the door, and she could now see splitters flying off. But suddenly, the blows stopped. Sophie opened her eyes and was worried to see the door was still in its place. Why did they stop? Well, breaking the door down didn't seem to work, so the police had to think of another way. She heard rumbling noises, and they were clearly trying lots of things to get inside. But it was taking way too long for Sophie. She was done being trapped on the floor and wanted to help her mother. Suddenly, Sophie noticed that the legs of the chair were still on the rug that had tripped over. She reached with her arm to see if she could get her fingers in between the chair and the carpet, and to her surprise, it worked. Sophie had to muster up all her strength to push the leg away. It hadn't worked before, but she didn't want to give up. She figured the chair only had to move a small part for her to be able to crawl away. To Sophie's surprise, the chair began to move, and Sophie was finally able to crawl away. She immediately ran to her mother to tell her what she had accomplished, but was painfully reminded that she was still sleeping. Sophie heard a loud bang. She ran to the living room to see if the police were finally able to come inside, and they were. Sophie ran into the arms of one of the officers and quickly led them to her mother, but none of them seemed happy. The officers looked around them with shocked looks on their faces, and the paramedics hurried her mother onto a stretcher. Sophie didn't understand why everyone seemed to be in such a hurry to get out of this room. They put Sophie and her mother into an ambulance, and they drove to the nearest hospital. Sophie knew her mother would be well cared for, but she still wondered why the police were so shocked when they entered their house. But little did she know, it wasn't about the mess at all. There was something else inside their apartment that explained everything, but Sophie was too young to understand. She had to wait for her mother to wake up, and only then would the police explain everything as well as they could. At the hospital, they hooked Sophie's mother onto various machines, which looked terrifying to Sophie. She had no idea what the machines were for. Luckily, Sophie's grandmother arrived soon after. They had contacted her about what had happened and asked her to come. Sophie was ecstatic to see a familiar face after such a hectic day. She ran to her grandmother, snuggled up in her arms, and told her everything. It didn't seem to get any better with Hannah for a while, but after a few hours, she slowly began to wake up. Hannah moved her head from side to side and slowly opened her eyes. She was very confused about what had happened and didn't realize she was in a hospital at first. But Sophie told her proudly how brave she had been all day and that she was the one who called 911. Shortly after Hannah woke up, police entered her room. They began to ask her what had happened, but Hannah had no idea. She went to bed feeling a bit sick, but the rest was all very blurry. The officers looked very serious and wrote everything down. When the officers were finally able to get inside the apartment, they immediately noticed something. There was a specific smell lingering around, but they didn't connect it to anything yet. But as soon as they entered Hannah's bedroom, they were shocked to realize the smell had worsened and probably had come from there. They immediately investigated the situation and found mold growing behind the bed, behind the closet, and in some corners of the ceiling. The mold was slowly spreading throughout the house and was probably the reason why Hannah was so sick and drowsy. The mold was toxic, and if Sophie hadn't called 911 and 11, it could have ended badly for them both. Hannah was so proud of her daughter for handling the situation so well. She felt stupid for not noticing the mold sooner. Sophie was also checked for any symptoms, but luckily for her, she was perfectly healthy. The doctors don't know why the mold only infected Hannah and not Sophie, but they were happy it didn't. As soon as Hannah started to feel better, she called the concierge of the building to explain the situation. There was no way they would go back there if there was still mold inside. The owner of the apartment building was shocked to hear something like this had happened and immediately checked the other apartments for mold as well. It turned out that there was a big mold outbreak in the building and every apartment had to be cleaned. It was a big operation that took several weeks to be finished. Everyone in the building was shocked that this had happened and sent their good wishes to Hannah and Sophie. Sophie was forever changed after this eventful day, but in a positive way. She felt more confident in who she was and more independent as well. She was very proud that she had saved her mother. The mold never returned to their apartment, and Sophie grew up to become a paramedic herself and continued to save lives.